In this video, we're going to look at how to prove congruent triangles using side, 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 angle, or angle, side, angle as our congruence theorems. So the first thing here is we have some givens, and what we need to do is get those givens in our proof and label our diagram, and then figure out which two triangles we're trying to prove congruent and how we're going to get there. So let's go ahead and start by just writing out our givens, and then we're going to label our diagram. So we have AR is perpendicular to CB. And then we also have AR bisects angle CAB. So I have those in my proof, but now I need to mark them in my diagram and then figure out what conclusions can I make. So I have AR is perpendicular to CB. So AR is perpendicular to CB. So what you could do is you could look in your little bag of reasons and look for, okay, if I have perpendicular lines, what conclusion can you make? So that's going to be one of your blue statements. So if I have perpendicular lines, that's going to imply right angles. So when I go to mark that in my picture, I'm going to go ahead and mark right angles. And I'm going to put angle 1 and angle 2, or you could use 3 letters. So angle 1 and angle 2 are going to be right angles, and that's because of the fact that I have perpendicular lines. So let's go ahead and let's state that since I just marked it. So angle 1 and angle 2 are right angles. And my reason for that is perpendicular lines imply right angles. And remember, this comes right from my bag of reasons. And then before I do anything further with that, if you remember right angles, there's 2 ways that you can go with these. You can say that you have congruent right angles, because all right angles are congruent, or you could say that that makes right triangles. So for right now, I'm just going to kind of leave that, and we're going to come back to it. And if we look at our next given here, it says that AR bisects angle CAB. So let's go ahead and get that marked in our picture. So we're bisecting CAB. So we're bisecting an angle. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to highlight that angle that I'm bisecting. So it's CAB. There's my angle that I'm dealing with. And from there, let me go ahead and relabel these because they got shifted on me. So here's my angle 1 and angle 2. So then from there, if this angle is being bisected, if I look at my statements, my bag of reasons, I would look in the yellow for angles, and I would see that a bisector implies 2 congruent angles. So that means if this angle right here is being bisected, so it's this whole angle that's being bisected, the parts that would have to be congruent is this part here and this part over here, because AR is what's splitting that yellow angle into 2 equal parts. So again, you can use 3 letters, or you can just put numbers in there. It's probably easier just to use numbers. So from that given, I can conclude that angle 3 must be congruent to angle 4, because an angle bisector implies 2 congruent angles. And then if you look at, so basically I've made conclusions from both of those given. So I can kind of check those off as, okay, I've used them, I made valid conclusions, I used my reasons from the bag, so I know that they're good, valid reasons that I'm using in my proof. And now if I look at, well, which triangles am I even trying to prove? That's an important step here. So let's go ahead and look at that. So ACR, I would recommend highlighting the triangles that you're looking at. I want to prove that that's congruent to ABR. So I want to prove that that's congruent to this triangle here. So in order to prove that the triangles are congruent, we really have 5 congruence theorems, but for this section, we're only going to focus on the 3. So I already have 2 sets of angles labeled from my givens as angles that I could prove are congruent to each other. And then the other thing, if I'm trying to prove that these are congruent, if you look at our methods here, we already have 2 angles. So if we could prove the side between those 2 angles is congruent, that's going to allow us to use angle side angle. So whenever you're doing these proofs, I have my givens. I've already used those. The other thing that you always need to tell yourself is look at the diagram. So it might even be helpful, just make a note, make that part of your checklist here, looking at the diagram. Did you make all your conclusions from the diagram? So when we're looking at the diagram, there's always two sets of things that you should be looking for. You should be looking for vertical angles, so an X, and you should be looking for reflexive properties, so shared sides or shared angles. So in this case, I don't see an X, so I don't have vertical angles, but I do see sides that are shared. And if you use highlighters, your highlighters are literally going to change color there because that's where it's overlapped. So I can mark that shared side and I can write that in my proof. So that's going to be kind of like my check on, okay, I've checked the diagram. So AR is congruent to AR. And notice I don't have anything coming before it. There's no given. That was just using the diagram. This is by reflexive property. So when I look at my picture, it's clear that it's going to be angle side angle as the method that we're going to use. So in my proof, when I say angle side angle, I need to have a set of congruent angles, a set of congruent sides between the set of congruent angles, and then another set of congruent angles. So when I go to look in my proof, I better have all of those things before I finish this proof up. So when I look for the first set of angles, so let's say that's these right angles, do I have that they're congruent in my proof? And right now in my proof, the only thing I have is that I have right angles. I never said that they're congruent. So that tells me that I'm going to actually say angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 because all right angles are congruent. Now remember, you could have said that we have right triangles. That's kind of why I waited to make that next conclusion. But in this case, I want to just say that these are congruent because this A stands for a set of congruent angles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add that. So I'm going to say angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. So the reason why those are congruent, that would be in my yellow reasons because I'm looking at right angles. That was given. I'm given something about angles. My conclusion is that that makes them congruent because all right angles are congruent. So now up here, I can check off my A because I've just proven a set of congruent angles. So there's my first one. Then I have to say, okay, well, did I prove a set of congruent sides between the two angles? So that means this side right here. Did I mention it in my proof? Right here, I said the segment AR is congruent to the segment AR. So there's my side. Then I look at this last A, which is going to stand for these angles because it was angle side angle. And did I state that they're congruent in my proof? And right here, I stated that those angles are congruent. So I can check that off. So this right here is your checklist or your outline of your proof, and it is required when you're doing this so that you know that you've actually proven the things that you need to prove before you can make your final conclusion. So now I have everything I need, and I can go ahead and I can connect all these pieces. So this, and this all lead me to my final proof statement, which is triangle ACR is congruent to triangle ABR by angle side angle. And that's your new reason. That's going to be your new theorem for why you can say that those triangles are congruent. So let's go ahead and try another one. And the more of these you do, the more comfortable you're going to be with them. So remember the first thing here. You might want to even, your first step, you might want to get your triangles highlighted that you're looking at, then start marking your picture, or vice versa. At some point, you need to get your picture, which triangles you're looking at. So let's just say I start with that. So if I have RTQ, so there's one triangle I'm looking at. I want to prove that that's congruent to triangle STP, so this triangle here. I mean, there's only two triangles in the picture, so you can kind of see that those would be your two triangles. But it's good to highlight them as well so things are clear to look at. And then we start marking our givens, putting them in our proof. So let's go ahead and do that. So we have T is the midpoint of PQ. So that's given. We have PQ bisects RS. And then we have RQ is congruent to SP. So I get all my givens, and now I need to label them in my picture. So it says T is the midpoint of PQ. So that means I go to PQ. So this is PQ. T is in the middle of that segment. So if you look at, this is a segment, so if you look in your pink reasons, you're going to find a midpoint divides a segment into two congruent parts. So if T is the midpoint of PQ, this part and this part have to be equal. So that's something I concluded. I labeled it in my picture. It should go in my proof. Pretty much whenever you label something in your picture, you should state it in your proof. So your statement, it goes in the box. That's specific to what you just marked. And then your reason is right from your bag. So from your bag of reasons, you have a midpoint implies two congruent segments. So then I'm just going to kind of leave that for now. Then I go to my next given, and it says that we have a PQ is bisecting RS. So the thing that's being bisected comes after the word bisects. So RS is what's getting bisected. So that's a segment. So you would go into your pink reasons again, and you would see that a segment bisector implies two congruent segments. So that means this right here is being cut into two equal parts by PQ. So these parts are equal. So from that given, using that given, the conclusion I made was I concluded in my picture that those two segments were congruent. So I'm going to write that down. And that's because a segment bisector implies two congruent segments. And then we look at our last given. Our last given here says RQ is congruent to SP. These are the easiest givens because you don't have to make a conclusion from it. It's just telling you RQ, so this segment here, is congruent to SP. So that's it. I mark it. Oh, there's another set of sides, so that's good. There's nothing I can conclude from that. And then the other thing is, look at the diagram. Is there anything you can conclude from the diagram? Well, when I look at the picture, I see an X. So that means I do have vertical angles. Now, before I write vertical angles in my proof, I already see right here that I could just use side, side, side. See how I have three sets of sides here, three sets of sides here, and they're all corresponding? So that means I could use side, side, side to prove this set of triangles are congruent to each other. Or I could disregard one of those sides, the one that they gave me, and I could use vertical angles, mark those, and then do side angle side, which would just be more steps. So I'm not going to do it that way, but it's not wrong if you did it that way. So that's the beauty of these proofs, is you can kind of pick and choose sometimes which method you want to use. So if I'm going to use side, 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 before I can actually get to that conclusion, I need to verify that I've actually proved all three sets of corresponding sides are congruent. So for the first S, I'm going to look at right here. I have one S right here, so I'm just going to make an S here. So that allows me to check this off. Then I go to the next S. Well, I have another set of sides right here, so there's another set. Check that off, and then I have another set of sides, so I can check that off. So because I have three sets of congruent sides already mentioned in my proof, I can bring these three statements together. And that leads me to my final statement, which I'm always just going to kind of copy from what they give you so you don't mess up the order of the letters. Just copy it down. So we have STP, triangle STP is congruent to RTQ. And my reason for that is side, side, side. And remember, that's not the only reason, because you could have done it using vertical angles and then use side angle side. But this was the quicker approach and I guess more direct approach. That's why I chose this way. So go ahead and try the check your understanding, and remember, we will be doing more of these, so they will get better as time goes on. So don't be too hard on yourself while you're trying the check your understanding, but do your best and make valid conclusions using your bag of reasons, mark your diagram, and use those givens to make conclusions, use the diagram to make conclusions, and it'll hopefully get you to where you need to go.